Hi, and welcome to Straight Talk About God video, the Lost Tribe series. We're going to have a small birthday party today. So, for the Scythians and the Lacedaemonians, as a little side part, so you can get out your party hats and noisemakers. We followed the tribe of Dan. We're still with Dan. He's such an integral part of the Lost Tribes. We followed him around, well, practically all over the old world, the whole old world, and for the last few times. And many of those times that he went was, there are two different times, before the Exodus in Egypt, and I believe even before the family went to Egypt, that Dan was part of the Phoenicians. But certainly, while they were in Egypt, he made many trips all around. And we discovered all of that and named a bunch of places and everything. But, but also after the Exodus, from the Promised Land, where it says that Dan abode in ships when they had a war, and they didn't help out with the war because Dan abode in ships. He was always the shipping guy, okay? And as such, let me remind you that they were the highly educated people around. They didn't live on the farm, okay? They rubbed shoulders with all of the different cultures where they went, and picked up wonderful pieces of technology and so forth. And the Tuatha De Danann from Ireland, actually, that's where the magic of Ireland reportedly began, because they were so far ahead of everybody else that they did stuff look like magic. So we got leprechauns and little people and all that kind of stuff out of Ireland. But every place they went, if you remember, they fulfilled the prophecy that they would leave their mark. It'd be like a serpent in the way. And you look at a serpent in the way, you can tell when a snake has been there, okay, because of the way it moves. Well, every place Dan went, he renamed the rivers, the towns, the islands, the countries after himself. And you remember that the name Dan in Hebrew has only two letters because there's no vowels. And so it's D-N. Now when you translate that into other languages, then it becomes, all five of the vowels can fit in the D-N. So you got Dan and Don and Din and Den and Dun, all of that, see? And that's what he did. He left his mark every place that he went. And they were well known, the Phoenicians and the Danites, well known for their cunning, education, and strategy, okay? Now, a couple of times ago, we saw how they were responsible for the founding and the ruling of what became classical Greek. You remember the Danite Argives? Argive Dani? Now that doesn't mean that they were the only ones that were there, because other groups of Israelites were also there. Dan was the guy that made it first. And, and we also talked about Jason and the Argonauts. Well, the Argonauts came from Argo, supposedly the oldest city established in Greece, and it was established by the Dani. The Argi Dani are big in Greek history. Okay, those are the tribe of Dan. Okay. Let's see where we are. Wait a minute. Oh, and Jason, remember last time we talked about the Jassonica, which was the towns of Jason. In other words, the places where he went, he left his mark there. See? And whether it was the name of Jason or whether it was the name of Dan with something else attached to it, we don't know. But the towns of Jason, we'll do a little review on that in just a bit. You remember that they went up. They were all around the Black Sea, okay, around the Black Sea, and all of the rivers that came out of the steppes and the north area came down into the Black Sea. We found out they were all named with a DN. There was the Dnepr, the Dnieper, the Dniester, and the Don River. And if you look, I'll bet if you look in any of the countries that border the Mediterranean, you're going to find a River Don. I mean, I know 4 places that there's a River Don listed, and we'll get to some of those today. And Don is right up there in the steppes of Russia, where the Israelites were, okay? Because out of Egypt and after Egypt, before the conquering of the house of Israel, the 10 tribes in the northern kingdom, before that happened, Dan, in ships, as the Phoenicians, went everywhere, including the United States, North America. They went everywhere, and everywhere they went, they pioneered, they named their name, and that information got back to the Israelites, of course. Solomon knew all about that stuff, because all the routes that Dan pioneered, his navy went and got gold from Ophir and all those places. That information got back to the Israelites from the Phoenicians, from Dan. Just as a reminder, we've got in Ireland, just got a short list here, okay, short list. In Ireland, okay, land names, Donegal, Dundalk, Dungarvan, Dunglo, Dunmore, Dingle, D-I-N, Dingle, Dunlogere, Dunmanay, Bandon. Those are all towns, okay? And in the water around Ireland, we've got Donegal Point, okay, and Dingle Bay, Dundrum Bay, Bandon River, Dunmanay Point, and the River Don itself, okay? And then in Scotland, you got the River Don again, and the River Dee, okay? And you've got Aberdeen, Dumfries, Duns, Edinburgh, Dunfermline, Dumbarton, Dundee, Dunbar, Dunblane, Dunoon. Dan was all over Ireland, right? Because they ruled Ireland, not the whole tribe of Dan, okay? Remind you that small groups, there were 62,000 of them that came out of Egypt, okay? And part of those went here and there in different places. And the tribe of Dan, part of them, ruled Ireland for 200 years, okay? That's why all those Dun names are in Ireland, because they ruled over there. They named everything by themselves, about themselves. Okay. Now again, we're going to use this book here, Dan, the Pioneer of Israel, okay, by Gawler, keeper of the crown jewels. You know, he wasn't out in the garage thinking about history. Okay, and I'm going to start at the very last page of the book. Okay, the very last page, because we talked about the birth of the Scythians. Well, where did the Scythians come from? Well, we know from 15 other segments of the Lost Tribes series that the Scythians they got their name from the fact that they were nomads. And nomads, like the gypsies, traveled around in their wagons, their booths, okay? And the name Scythian goes all the way back to Sukkoth. Sukkoth was a town that they lived in Egypt, up there in the northeast delta. And the Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of Sukkoth, because Sukkoth means booth. And the Feast of the Tabernacles, you take tree limbs and branches and so forth and build yourself a little roof hut on top of your house or out in the street or in the backyard or whatever, and you're supposed to live there for a while to remind you of all the time in the desert for the 40 years that you lived and God took care of you. It's a very joyous celebration. Okay, it's not like Atonement or some of the other ones. So they got their name Scythian from Scuth because they lived in booths, and Scythia got its name from the Scythians, not the opposite way around. Okay, it wasn't Scythia, and then then the group of people moved into that area, and they were called the Scythians. They were the Scythians before. It came from their nomadic existence. But history itself tells us where they came from. Herodotus went and talked to them. Okay, he talked to the Scythians, got a lot of their information. Well, even though we don't know who they are and all that, and maybe they didn't know exactly where they came from, they had their traditions, right? And the really big things that happen to a large group of people. I mean, there were over 5 million of the Israelites in the house of Israel are taken away from by Assyria. I mean, they were a nation, right? And they had their traditions. And the biggest things that happen in the traditions of a large group like that will be carried forward, right? And by word of mouth rather than writing, things change, names change, but the basic stories are still there, okay? And one of the things that I want to remind you of is, well, Jason and the Argonauts. Okay, there's stuff involved with them, but who were the Argonauts? What were they called? Okay, they were called the Heraclidae because they were descended or associated with Heracles. Heracles, the name means traitor. He was a big time man, traitor. And these Heraclidae, the day of Heracles, were the traitors. There were traitors, okay? But the word Heracles gets moved around in a different place to Hercules. They're the same person. Heracles and Hercules are the same person. Well, what do we know about Hercules, huh? Strongest man in the world, strongest man of history. You know, like Atlas with the earth on his shoulder. Hercules, oh, well. Jason and the Argonauts, Heracles, and the Heraclidae are all tribe of Dan. Tribe of Dan. Who, out of the tribe of Dan, who in the whole Bible is the big, heavy-duty, strong man? Samson. He was a Danite. Okay? The Danites would carry Samson forward into history, and he'd be maybe a different name. Does the same stuff. Big time guy. Well, of course, things that happened to Israel would also be carried forward, right? For instance, the wilderness, the tabernacle, things about the tabernacle, things about the Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant went to every war with them, right? The Ark of the Covenant was in front of them as they circled around Jericho for 7 days, right? They always had the Ark there with them because God was there with them, okay? I think maybe the solution to the Scythian legend, the legends of the Scythians, of their leader and their racial things, of course, something connected with the wonderful schooling in the wilderness, 40 years of history, okay? And of course the tabernacle of testimony, okay? And the ark overlaid with gold, so forth, okay? And about the ark they have cherubim. Cherubim with a big part of the ark. I mean, there's big gold box, okay? But the only decoration on the ark was on the mercy seat with the cherubim, you know, with their wings out and everything. You remember that. And also, what about the Ten Commandments? You know, the tables of stone, and the pot with manna was in the ark, right? Okay. Now I just want to mention all that stuff because now we're going to go and see what Herodotus found out from them, what they said, okay? Let's see, maybe I have to remind you of some of the stuff we talked about last time. Jason, we already mentioned Jason and the Argonauts. Also, last time, remember that we talked about Cyrus. Okay, Cyrus, because Assyria conquered the house of Israel, put them up between the Black and the Caspian Sea underneath the Caucasus Mountains, and they did that. It's the first time in history that ever happened. They did that to form a buffer state. Again, there were 5 or 6 million of them, okay? Put them all up in that area between them on the west and the Medes and the Persians on the east, their enemies. So they put those Israelites right between them. And if the Medes and the Persians ever tried to get to the Assyrians, they'd have to go through those millions of Israelites, plus some of the other native people that were there before the Israelites showed up. Okay? It's a buffer state. But also, you can conjecture, if you want, I would rather call it a theory, that Cyrus, the one who conquered Babylon, okay, took over from Babylon, Cyrus was an Israelite. As an Israelite. Isaiah says that he was mine anointed. God says, Isaiah, this guy's going to show up. What was that? That's in Isaiah 44 and 45. The end of 44 talks about Cyrus, and the beginning of 45 tells more about him. And he says, this guy, my anointed, is going to free my people. Well, Babylon wasn't even in bondage yet. Isaiah was around with the house of Israel. And that was 150 years before Cyrus was even born. Talk to him about by name and what he's going to do. And where he comes from. He comes from right up there with the Medes. Cyrus welded together the Persians and the Medes, and then took over from Assyria. Well, first of all, Assyria lost 185,000 men in a night, okay, when they tried to go against Jerusalem. And their power, boom, nothing, see? And that's like 100 years after Israel went away. So if their power gets so diminished, then Babylon, with the help of some of the mercenaries from Israel, was able to take over and become the next world empire, as small as it was. But through Cyrus, and with the help of some of his cousins, the Israelites, he beat up on Babylon and took over, and then we had the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay? And it all came from north of Babylon, underneath the Caspian Sea, where the Israelites were anyway. Okay? Isaiah says, he's going to free my people. And 150 years later, it happened. Great stuff. I had to mention again, I've never heard this anywhere, okay? It just came to me. What a coincidence. Why did Israel get taken away? Because immediately upon the split of the two nations, they went right to idol worship. And Jeroboam set up a golden calf down below in Bethel and up high in Dan. The whole country was, Every king, every single one of the kings, all the way until they were conquered in 721, were paganistic. They all worshiped the pagan gods. That's why they were conquered. God said, don't do that. I'll take you away. Well, Judah got conquered too, didn't they? They got punished. Well, why? It doesn't say so in the Bible. It says what was the result of that was going to be, as far as the land was concerned. God said, you didn't do what I told you to do and let the land lay fallow for 7 years, every year, 1 year for every 7. So you're going to go into bondage over in Babylon for 70 years, and that'll make up for the land being not left fallow for 490 years. And then you'll come back. That wasn't the reason why they were taken away. Huh? God didn't say, if you don't do this, I'm going to put you in bondage. He said, don't worship other gods. They must have been paganistic. Okay? After the split, until they were taken away, more than half of the kings went pagan. More than half of them. Okay? All the way up to Solomon. After Solomon, it has been quite a while since I studied this, but I think it was every 7th king, something like that. Every 7th king showed up and wiped out all the groves and the idols and the altars and all that stuff, and then after a while they just got back into it. That's why they were punished and taken into bondage. Okay? Who's in charge of God's stuff for a nation? The priests, the high priests. Okay? They had to be the ones that were promoting and perpetuating the idol worship while it was happening. They had to be going along with it. Well, that's what explains. It's always been kind of a mystery, okay? 650,000 of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin and some of the Levites that were there went to Babylon in captive. Well, okay, Cyrus comes along, beats up on Babylon and says, okay, you guys can all go back. They didn't. They didn't. 50,000. 50,000. 1/13 of the whole nation went back to Jerusalem. 600,000 of them stayed. They stayed? Why? Well, in the first place, after 70 years, they were mostly doing pretty good. But you'd think that the priesthood and all them, they were still worshiping idols over there. Okay? So the ones who were true God believers, trusters, came back and built the church, the city and the temple. See? And when they came back, and this is the point of that adds another piece of evidence to that. When they came back, it says that Ezra had to write a letter and say, hey, are there any Levites up there? We need somebody to be a priest down here. Well, wait a minute. That means that nobody of the priesthood came back from Babylon. They didn't have one. So they had to, where did he write to? Where did Ezra write his letter to? The Israelites up north. Okay? So they sent us the Levites, because they didn't have any. Very interesting stuff, I'm telling you. So, and also I want to remind you of the rock inscription, just to verify some of the eastward movements of some of the house of Israel, because some of them not only under the Black Sea went west as the Sumerians, and up above the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains as the Scythians, and they went west. Some of them down below the Caspian Sea went east, all the way to Japan. Okay, there's a burial site over where is it? It's about 20 miles north of Bombay, India. And well, I'm going to read some of that inscription to you, okay? I mean, this is hard evidence, right? Right? The rock temples of India give us some additional testimony regarding the existence in the regions about the Black Sea of the Danites and other tribes of Israel. Parentheses, from the preface of Moors, Saxons in the East and West, I extract the following translation of the Hebraic inscription upon the walls of a rock temple in Kanari, 20 miles north of Bombay. That's kind of over on the west side of India. Right? Here's what the inscription says. It's a long one. Okay? Lo, the worship of Saka, S-A-K-A, that's what they called a huge group of Israelites. That's the Persian name, the Persian Medo name for the Israelites. They call them the Saka, S-A-K-A-A, or S-A-K-K-A, Saka, which becomes the sons of Saka, Sakasuni. Sakasuni becomes Saxons, the Saxons, the sons of Isaac, is what it is. Saka, it's an Israelite name, that's the main point. Okay? Lo, the worship of Saka is the fruit of my lips. His garden, which Cyrus laid low, was glowing red. Behold, it is blackened. His people, being aroused, would have their rights, for they were cast down at the city of the parting of Dan. Dan, the tribe of Dan. Who, being delivered, was perfectly free. Everyone grew mighty, and Saka's mouth, enkindling them, brought the princes together of the race of Harari. In parentheses, he's got here the people of the hill country of Ephraim. 2 Samuel 22, 9 through 11. As to Dan, it goes on. As to Dan, his unloosing was destruction, oppression, and strife. He stoutly turned away, he departed twice. The predetermined thought is a hand prepared. That's a quote. Right? Yea, Gotha, what do we know about Gotha? What about Gothland? We talked about Gothland last time too. Gothland, isn't that Denmark? Parentheses, Gotha, parentheses, the opposite or north coast of the Black Sea is called Gothland. That watched for that goes on to say, that watched for the presence of Dan afforded concealment to the exile. The redeemed of Kasha wandered about the flock like a flock overdriven. There's all this stuff about Dan over in India, huh? Because that's where he went. Okay. Now the name Saka, used in the inscriptions, apparently is the title of their god. God said, "Saka is the fruit of my lips." Okay. It's one of the titles signifying the most pure, given to God in the Jewish Passover hymn at the present day. The people who used it were in the company of Dan, and as it is Hebraic, and an allusion seems to be made to the princes of Ephraim, Harari, they were probably the descendants of the captivity of Samaria. Right? And Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, who had some 2 centuries to increase and expand. They might not also be, Might they not also be identical to the Sakai, Sakai, or Scythians, who about this time possessed those regions? The Persians called all the Scythians Sakai. Okay. This is such good stuff, I tell you. We're going to... The overland Danites carried away by the lost tribes of Syria in 721. Okay, they relocated as a buffer state. Talked about that, from which, under the names of Saka, East Kuza, over there in the east, and the Gamira, which became Sumerian over in the west under the Black Sea. They became mercenaries, robbers, and rebels, and finally migrated northwest and east to become the Celts and the Scyths. As far as China, some of them. Asian history has much to say about the people called the Shakas, Shakas. You know, different spelling, same people. And the evidence even suggests that Gautama Buddha was an Israelite. I mean, that's 400 years after the captivity in 721, you know. Okay. But let's go to the birthday party. Birthday party, okay? There's numbered points here on 40. We talked about that already, okay? Remember those things that they would carry by tradition forward into their history and would be talked about, okay? Page 37. But what the Scythians themselves told Herodotus is, so far as it is intelligible, remarkable. The Scythians say that they are the most recent of all nations. Now, when is this? Herodotus was 400 BC, okay? So that would be 300 years after the fall of Samaria and 200 years at least after most of them moved up through the Caucasus Mountains and became to Arsareth and became the Scythians up there, okay? 400 BC. Okay. Moses said to Israel, "The Lord did not set his love upon you because you were more than number than any of the other people, for ye are the fewest of all people." And here's an interesting part. Assyrian, quote, Assyrian and ready to perish was my father. And he went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a few and became there a nation, great, mighty, and populous. That's from Deuteronomy. Who's he talking about there? Jacob. Jacob, my father, went down to Egypt. He was just about ready to die in 17 years. He was 147 years old. Went with the family. Okay? That has to do with being the most recent of all nations. Egypt was already a nation. All right? All those nations were formed. Israel was not a nation. Not until 1453 BC, when the Exodus happened. The next point. The Scythians say, this is out of Herodotus again, the Scythians say that the first man that appeared in this country, which was a wilderness, was named Targetaus, Targitaus, Targetus. They reckoned the number of years from their first beginning, being a nation, from King Targetus to the time of Darius. That pins it down. Darius crossed over against them to be not more than 1,000 years, but just that number. That's what Herodotus says. Darius, several kings down from Cyrus, king of the Medo-Persian Empire, made many incursions into Greece. You remember the movie The 300, Spartans and all that, and they tried to come against them and everything? Well, Darius also tried to come against the Scythians, but it's pretty good because he couldn't beat them, and he finally just gave up, because they were nomads, right? And they had all their valuable stuff in their wagon, and they take their flocks in their wagon and they just move. They always stayed a day ahead of Darius' huge army, right? And they'd send guerrilla groups in to pester him, right? And they did that for a while, and he said, "Oh, these guys, let's go home." He couldn't beat the Scythians, you know, but he tried to come across to the west a lot. Darius, 1,000 years before that is when the Scythians say that their country was formed, and their king was there, Targetos was there. Well, 1,000 years before Darius came, because Darius, let me read this next part to be more detailed for you. Darius' expedition against the Scythians took place about 500 BC. 500 BC. So that 1500 BC would be the date of the appearance of their king, Targetus, quote, in the wilderness. They had a king in the wilderness they called Targetus. Okay? The Scythians called him Targetus in their language that they were speaking that day. Maybe 1500 years. 1500 BC. Darius was 500. 1,000 years later, they weren't even up there in Scythia. 1,000 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, from 400 BC, they weren't even in Israel. That was before the Exodus happened. Okay? The Exodus happened 1453 BC, according to the Pyramid of Giza. You have to look that up. You can look at God in 10 Minutes, a couple pyramid short videos on the pyramid there. And that places it right there at the same time. The Scythians tell Herodotus that around 1500, 1453 BC, 1500, they were in the wilderness and they had this king that they now call Targetus. At least that's what Herodotus called him. Now they didn't have it written down, and they said what he thought would be spelled Targetus. But we'll see that might not be it might be the case. Okay? I suggest that Herodotus, in writing down the Scythian legend, spelt in Greek characters as nearly as he could, as he thought they pronounced them, the names of certain things mentioned by the Scythians, and that his transcribers, meeting with the words which they did not understand, altered the spelling to make them comprehensible Greek words. Or else that Herodotus himself made the blunder and wrote that what he thought they said. I place Herodotus' version side by side with my suggested interpretation of the legend, including the words that I have supposed had been uttered by the Scythians and stumbled at by Herodotus and his transcribers. So here's just a couple of pages here. What the Scythians said and what Gawler suggests is the real interpretation of it. Okay? First of all, the first man that appeared in this country was a wilderness, okay, named Targetos. Well, Israel first became a nation in the wilderness under Thagedus, Thagedous. That's Hebrew, okay? And it means a testimony or covenant, okay? They became a nation under the covenant, huh? It doesn't really refer to Moses as the king. Their ruler was God, and his law was their ruler, okay? See how this works? They say that the parents of this Targatos was Jupiter and the daughter of the river Borysthenes. Well, how are you going to make that into Israel? Pretty easy. Pretty easy. Herodotus, the testimony, emanated from Jehovah and was given through one drawn out of the water. Moses. Okay? Moses. Because he came out of the river, right? And that he had 3 sons. Herodotus had 3 sons. Okay? God's three sons of the testimony. The service of the Mishkan Haggaduth, the tabernacle of the testimony, was administered by the family of 3. Remember, there was Moses and Aaron and Miriam, right? And Moses was the kid, and Aaron and Miriam were older, right? They were the 3. During their reign, and he's got the Greek words here, they produced a golden workmanship. And then it goes on to talk about that workmanship. First of all, there was an aratron, in Greek was a plow. Zugon, in Greek, a yoke, or zugos. Okay? And then third Greek word was sagarin, an axe, and a bowl. Okay, so they had this big gold thing, and there were the 3 elements involved in there. The sacred things within the Holy of Holies, all except the tables that were of gold, are overlaid with gold. Okay? That's the first thing. A golden workmanship. Then in the ark, that's the ark. In the ark, Aran, in Hebrew, the Ark of the Covenant, okay? But we've got hlukos in Hebrew, tables of the covenant, huklos, okay? And then we've got sahakrovim, that's the cherubim, okay? And then we've got the golden pot with the manna in it, right? Now the 5th thing that they talk about is dropping down from heaven fell on Scythian territory. Dropping down from heaven. Something dropped down from heaven and fell on Scythian territory, huh? Well, the tables themselves and the patterns of the rest were given direct by Jehovah to Moses. The law, their king, Herodotus, came down from heaven. 6. This is a good one too. That the eldest, seeing them first, approached intending to take them up. But as he came near, the gold began to burn. When he had retired, the second went up, and it did the same again. But when the youngest went up, the third, it became extinguished. The elder brothers, in consequence of this giving way, surrendered the whole authority to the youngest. That's exactly what happened in the wilderness with Miriam and Aaron. All right? They began to grouse among themselves. Who are you, Moses? And God got them all together, and he said, this is the guy here. You're wrong. Aaron, you got to do this stuff. And Miriam, you're going to be a leper for a while, just to show you what's going on. Okay? They tried to say that, well, we should have say so too, right? That would carry over. That's a big deal. That would carry over in the Scythian the Scythian legends, right? Okay, the last point here in the legend, this sacred gold, the king's watch with the greatest care. Sacred gold, gold workmanship, sacred gold. Now, sacred gold, they with greatest care, and annually, once a year, annually approach it with magnificent sacrifices to render it propitious. The high priest goes in once a year with the sacrifice, okay, to the Ark of the Covenant and the tables of stone and all that stuff. Okay? Miriam and Aaron 7. But unto the second, where the ark and the rest of these things were placed, went the high priest once a year, not without blood. Where did the Scythians, where were they born? The Scythians were born in the wilderness after the Exodus. Woo! Let's see here. 48 birthday. Oh, okay. 38, 4. This is the last little bit here. This has to do with the Lacedaemonians. They're part of the birthday party too, because they are Scythians. It was noticed that the Lacedaemonians, the acknowledged relatives of the Jews, maybe you remember that part, the acknowledged relatives of the Jews, and like the Scythians, Heraclidae, Danites, Israelites, say that their ancestor, Lacedaemon, was the son of Jupiter and Taygeta. Thagados, Taygeta, Taygets, T-A-Y-G-E-T-A, or T-A-Y-G-E-T-S, or Taygetus. It's a different language, you spell it differently. It's not a different person. Was the name given to the mountain overlooking their city of Sparta. Their legend seems to describe them as the people of Jehovah through Tahagadus, the covenant. And it is curious that an early name of their country was Abel, A-E-B-A-L. Well, what about Mount Ebal in the wilderness? Dan, I wonder if we have anything left about covered just about everything with Dan. Let's see. Now, is that historical evidence? The historical evidence of the last 15 videos is just a coincidence? Or are you starting to accept the idea that the Celts and the Scythians and the Christian nations of Northwest Europe and the British Isles and the US and Canada are the lost tribes of the Kingdom of Israel? We got a lot more to go. I mean, this is, what is this, number 16, and we've got, I don't know, 7 or 8 more anyway, right? I mean, we haven't even looked in the book of Deuteronomy to compare the blessings of Moses with the tribes as they waited to go into the promised land. Remember, we did all that with Genesis 49 and and what Jacob promised to them. Well, we haven't talked about Moses' promise because we got a lot more stuff there. You take all those promises from Jacob and Moses, put them together according to the tribes, and then you go around the world and you find out what nation is known for being great writers. They write a lot. They're studious. They're bookworms. Or you may find it's the Netherlands. I'm not sure about that, but you might find that. Well, do that as an exercise. You'll find out where the lost tribes went. And I'm sure that one day soon we'll get back to the ruling class of Egypt. Those sons of Judah, remember, who took over when Uncle Joseph died in 1812 BC. We haven't talked about them a lot, but history is full of them. Okay? It's full of them. I've been gathering a lot of information on a group of people who ruled Egypt called the Hyksos. Hyksos. Get a couple of encyclopedias together and look up Hyksos. Hyksos. And you'll find that there's two different periods in Egyptian history where the Hyksos were ruling. Hey, the Hyksos. Let's see. Is it another coincidence that the precise time period that Joseph and other families of the sons of the man called Israel were living in the eastern Nile Delta? When in history, the history books say that they were ruled by the Hyksos, the Egyptians. Was that a coincidence? Perhaps you remember a city called Tanis, Danis, where the tribe of Dan lived and worshipped. So we'll find out about these shepherd kings, Hyksos, shepherd kings, the Hyksos, next time. Love the lost tribes, right? And I can't close out the lost tribe videos, any of them, without reminding you of the purpose and the result of studying the lost tribes. See, because we're not just doing a history lesson here. What we're doing is proving that God is real. We're proving that God is real. You go through all of these videos from start to finish and add your own research to it. You can't come away with any other conclusion than God must be real. He has to be real. No human, no group of humans, no nation, no company of nations. You get together any group of 20 nations on the earth, put them all together, and see if they can make happen what God did with these Israelites. Absolutely impossible. And once you go through the evidence, you're going to reach what Dr. Scott always used to say about it. He'd say, you reach a psychological certainty. That's a natural thing. You look at a bunch of evidence, and pretty soon you come to a conclusion. You say, yeah, that's got to be true, or that can't be true, whatever it is. Okay, big deal, God is real. We all know God is real. You don't have to tell us about God's real. Yeah, you do. Because if God is real, then the Bible is true. Well, that makes a different story. Because in the first place, you can't just make up your own God and say, oh, God is this. I believe in God. Yeah, I believe in God. I believe in the Bible. I believe in God. He's this. No, he's not. He's only what the Bible says. And what he says for us to do and what he outlines how to do it has to be the way that we walk. Okay? And if you get into the Christian walk, you'll find out that 25% of your whole life is given over to the purposes of God. Helping God, participating in his overall plan for the earth, for humanity, for the universe. That's heavy stuff. It's not easy. It's a very hard walk. Simple. All you have to do is make every decision that comes along. You look at the options and you say, God said this, my ego says this, the world says that. I'll do it God's way. I don't care what the world says. I don't care if I'm hated. I don't care if I don't have enough money. I don't care if whatever. God said he'd take care of me if I do this. Now that's what I'm going to do. Isn't that simple? That's simple. Well, the whole Bible says if you do that, God will take a bit of his spirit and put it in your body. And if you put it in your body, he looks at you and he sees himself. You know? You're saved, in other words. That's why we study the lost tribes. To prove God, prove the Bible, and give us the strength and the confidence that we can walk with God. Straight Talk About God video. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless.